We're now joined by Dr. Jerome Kim, DG of International Vaccine Institute. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And, you were with us 6 months ago, and I was asking you about the vaccine, and, you spoke about how hopeful you were for a vaccine soon. It's the end of the year, and the first vaccine program is rolling out in the UK as we speak. The Canada has given the go-ahead for the Pfizer vaccine as well. The US, we're expecting, will also give that go-ahead. What are your concerns right now?
So I think that the most important thing in the face of all this very, very hopeful news about vaccine efficacy and emergency use approvals is really around the duration of time that we've actually known about this efficacy. So right now, the signal for efficacy and safety is 2 months old. So in other words, we've got 2 months worth of follow-up information. Now, it's probably not likely to change the efficacy. Efficacy may drift downward over time. But we're still expecting to see a good level of efficacy, hopefully at 6 months and 12 months. The other important question is longer-term safety. Now, most of the safety signals that occur with vaccines occur within the first 2 months, which is why these national regulatory authorities waited for 2 months until issuing the emergency use approvals. On the one hand. On the other hand, there are some rarer events that sometimes occur with vaccines. And it's going to be very important for countries and companies to keep track of these so that we can actually, tell people who are receiving vaccines, assure them that these vaccines are safe and efficacious.
Right. In fact, there have been allergic reactions to the Pfizer vaccine in the UK. There are reports of 2 health workers, reacting in that manner. So now a warning is there. What would you say on this?
So we do have allergic reactions to vaccines. With the RNA vaccines, there was a tendency for people after their second dose to have worse side effects. And, whether this will then allow them to get a third dose of vaccine at some time later in the future if a booster is needed, or whether they'll have to switch to a different vaccine is, again, one of those scientific questions that we just don't have the answer to yet. It is very important to document these side effects, though, so that as we gain more experience, we'll be able to assure patients or people around the world who need to be vaccinated that these vaccines have manageable side effects.
Right. Dr. Jerome, now, while the UK has begun its vaccination program, the Canada has given the go-ahead for this Pfizer vaccine. The US also were expecting that. Let's talk about Asia as well. And if we see the UAE has spoken about the Chinese vaccine and how it's shown in their trials that it has 86% effectiveness or efficacy. What are your views on this?
So again, hopeful information. Now, usually, and I think you'll recall this from Pfizer and Moderna, and AstraZeneca, it's usually the company that announces the efficacy results, what we call the sponsor of the research. It's a little unusual that the UAE Ministry of Health would be the announcer. And, there are a lot of details that are missing. In the UAE trial, they were actually testing 2 vaccines. They were testing a vaccine from Wuhan and one from Beijing, and they were rather similar. But the question is, which one are they talking about? And are they talking about 15,000 people or 25,000 people? And of those people who were vaccinated, what number of people got infected? So again, there's a lot of missing information. And I really would hope that at some point Sinopharm will make its announcement. And I have a feeling that it will be coincident with an announcement from, the NMPA, the regulatory authority in China, about whether or not they've approved the vaccine for use.
That's right. There are 2 Chinese vaccines. So even I was looking to see which one, but it was not really named which of the Chinese vaccines. And speaking of, questions being raised, let's talk about Russia's Sputnik vaccine, which is being manufactured here in India. And, it's one of the vaccines we're looking at. What are your views on the data that's been provided so far by Russia that is using this vaccine to inoculate people there in Russia?
And again, it's very difficult to talk about a lot of these vaccines because mainly what we've seen, and this applies not only to Gamaleya, the Sputnik 5 vaccine, or to the Sinovac vaccine, but also to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and AstraZeneca. What we've really seen are press releases. Now, AstraZeneca actually published its paper a couple of days ago in The Lancet, so you can actually look at the data. But by and large, we're having to make suggestions or try to glean things from press releases. one of the things about the Gamaleya vaccine, and I would really, love to be to look at the data myself on safety and efficacy. But one of the things was that they didn't have quite as many people who had been participated in the trial and had become infected. And that usually gets to a question around how robust the data is, how reliable the estimate of efficacy is. So, with time, there will be more infections, and it will be very important to look at month 3, at month 6, to see if the efficacy, the very hopeful efficacy that was seen at month 2, continues.
And what are your views on the Oxford vaccine? That's the other vaccine that we're currently looking at here in India. It's already, being manufactured here in India. Again, you just spoke about how the results were published recently. And what are your views on the efficacy results that were published?
So I think the efficacy results were really interesting. You had a small group of people who got a half dose followed by a full dose. And the time period was not a month, it was at least a month. So that meant that some people must have gotten it at time 0 and maybe a month, maybe a little bit more than a month. And then there were people who got a full dose at time 0 and then at least a month later, again, very imprecise around the time. And interestingly, the people who got the half dose, full dose, the smaller group of people had 90% protection, which is good. Yes. It's like the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. The people who got a full dose followed by another full dose at least a month later had 60% protection. And why is that? We don't know. And, were there differences in the way the vaccines were administered or the spacing of the doses because they were kind of imprecise? So there are a number of questions that are raised around the design and the execution of the trial. And why did they get the half dose? And it turns out that was there a mistake, an error in the way the vaccine was presented or formulated and then administered. So I think that the AstraZeneca vaccine has some really attractive features. It's stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius, so refrigerator temperature, which makes it much easier to ship and for public health systems to administer. There was a suggestion that it decreased the amount of asymptomatic spread, which is like one of those scientific details. But what it means is that it may begin to impact transmission, which is actually for a country, for a community, a really important question. Is this vaccine going to be able to keep the virus from spreading in the community? Will it decrease hospitalizations? Will it decrease deaths? I mean, that's really what you're interested in as a community, as a country. So I think the AstraZeneca product has some really interesting features, and it's going to be really important to go through the data very carefully to understand exactly what happened and whether or not that particular part of the trial, the half dose, full dose, needs to be formally repeated designed in a particular way to look at the question: is a half dose, full dose associated with an efficacy of 90%?
Right. Well, this is one of the vaccines that's under consideration here in India. And what about the issue, talking about certain perhaps mistakes in the testing, etc. But there's another issue of vaccine hesitancy. This is talked about a lot in the West. Do you think it's as much of an issue here in Asia?
So vaccine hesitancy can be an issue everywhere. And, in Asia in general, and in countries like Brazil, acceptance of vaccines is much higher than in some countries in the West. But, in order to keep it that way, and in order to overcome vaccine hesitancy, we're going to have to be able to speak truthfully and we have to assure the population that the vaccines that we are recommending are in fact safe and efficacious. It may be that, in the United States, you may need to get celebrities involved in taking a vaccine shot in order to show that the vaccine is safe, efficacious. I mean, there are lots of things that
3 former presidents are planning to take the vaccine there in the US. So that's a great step, and perhaps the Queen in the UK. And before I let you go, one final question on this issue of vaccine equity and, that poor countries should get the vaccine. There are already accusations being made by certain groups that rich countries are hoarding vaccines. So what is being done on this?
So, countries around the world have been participating in something called COVAX. And COVAX intends to purchase 2 billion doses of vaccine, which will provide 20% of the necessary vaccine by the end of 2021. But other countries and 190 countries participate in COVAX, so a significant portion of the world and the world's population. Unfortunately, countries are hedging their bets. So many of the high-income countries have pre-ordered vaccine. And if you look at the amounts that are pre-ordered and you just add them all up, it's 8 billion doses, which is way more than any of those high-income countries needs. And so, I think it's really going to be important to see how all this plays out, because in the beginning, we know that a rate-limiting function will be the availability of vaccine, the ability of manufacturers to bring hundreds of millions of doses of vaccine into the supply chain. And so that will definitely affect access and equity. And so we have to depend on facilities like the COVAX, which is being led by Gavi, the World Health Organization, and CEPI, in order to assure low and middle income countries that they will have access.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jerome Kim, for speaking to us here at NDTV again.